Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Do appreciate you being with me. Okay, I want to get right into what I introduced yesterday morning. We are focused on the parable of the absent master of Matthew 25:14 and following. Everyone agrees, okay? I'm not aware of anyone that disagrees. Everyone agrees that Matthew 25:14 and following is Acts chapter 1. As Jesus ascended, he's now the absent master. The angel told the apostles, "You men of Galilee, what do you stand gazing into the heavens? This same Jesus, whom you see taken from you, shall come in like manner as you have seen him go." So, and by the way, we're going to look at the linguistics of in like manner as we continue our examination. But as I shared with you yesterday, I'm not going to go in depth on this. I'm just going to review. In the amillennial and the postmillennial world, widely accepted that in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24:25, that in Matthew 24, verses 4 to 34, we have a discussion of Christ's coming, the events leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and then Christ coming on the clouds of heaven with the angels, with a shout, with the sound of the great trumpet, to gather together the elect. Yes, that's admitted by amillennialists and postmillennialists to refer to AD 70. And yeah, I have people ask me all the time, how in the world can amillennialists and postmillennialists admit that Matthew 24, 4 to 34, is referring it to AD 70, and yet look at the identical language found in over all these other passages, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and say that's something entirely different. Well, point of fact is that's not proper hermeneutic, but I got to go on. So, as I have pointed out to you, in the Olivet Discourse, in the so-called first section of Matthew 24, 4 to 34, remember, amillennialists, postmillennialists, not dispensationalists, amillennialists and postmillennialists say, yeah, that's AD 70. Okay. There is in that section of the Olivet Discourse a fourfold alliterative pattern. A little anecdote here. Many years ago, after I wrote my book, Into All the World Then Comes the End, in which I discussed this pattern extensively, I was in a discussion with a very esteemed Bible professor from Abilene Christian University. Very, very highly regarded man. And we were discussing eschatology, and I asked him if he had ever seen the alliterative pattern. And he goes, I don't know what you're referring to. I shared with him what I'm about to share with you, and he was literally standing there amazed. He said, where did you come up with? Where did you read this? I said, I didn't read it anywhere. I just see it there. And he goes, this is literally astounding. He said, I have never in my life seen that pattern, but it's undeniable. And he was literally beside himself. And he was excited. Here he was, a very old, very old guy, having studied the Bible extensively all of his life, an esteemed Bible scholar respected around the world. He had never seen the pattern. What is it? In Matthew 24, 4 to 34, a fourfold pattern. Point number 1, preaching. Jesus told his apostles, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached into all of the world as a witness to the nations. Then comes the end. Number 2, persecution. Matthew chapter 24, 9 and following. Mark chapter 13, 9 and following. They will bring you before kings and before councils, before Sanhedrins, etc., etc. And they'll persecute you. Matthew 24, 9 and following. Preaching, persecution. Power. In Mark chapter 13, 9 and following, Jesus told them that as they were persecuted, as they went preaching, give no thought to what you shall say, because it shall be given to you by the Holy Spirit in that very hour what you shall say, and they will not be able to withstand the wisdom with which you speak. Okay? Preaching, persecution, power, parousia. Matthew 24, 29 to 31. Oh, and verse 34. This generation will by no means pass until all of these things, preaching, persecution, power, parousia, have been fulfilled. Now watch this, ladies and gentlemen. In Acts chapter 1 and verse 10, Jesus says to his apostles, you are my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the world. By the way, as we shall see as we continue, Jesus in Acts chapter 1 is drawing directly from Isaiah chapter 43, a prophecy and a prediction of the coming new creation, of the second Exodus leading into the entrance, or leading to the entrance into the new covenant creation. He said, you are my witnesses. Isaiah 43:10. Anyway, so here's Jesus sending his apostles out to preach the gospel. You are my witnesses. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth. That's Matthew 24:14. Persecution, found in the word witnesses. That word itself, martyrion, indicates throughout the New Testament, witness was not simply in the words of Jesus or in the words of the New Testament writers. It was not simply, oh, I saw something. No. In the New Testament, the word martyrion meant not only had you seen those things, not only had you witnessed them, but you gave witness to them through your persecution. Preaching, persecution. Acts chapter 1. The apostles asked Jesus, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? And Jesus responded by saying, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons which the Father has put under his control, but go into Jerusalem and there wait until you be endued with power. For you shall receive the Holy Spirit. And what would that Holy Spirit do for them? Oh, it would empower them to go and to preach in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. Preaching, persecution, power. Oh, parousia. You men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing into the heavens? This same Jesus, whom you have seen taken from you, shall come in like manner. Now let me ask you. In Matthew 24, we have this fourfold pattern. Preaching, persecution, power, parousia. And it is admitted by virtually almost all amillennialists and almost all postmillennialists. Well, sure, the parousia, Matthew chapter 24, 29 and following, that's AD 70. Okay. Well, guess what? The threefold pattern leads directly to that. Preaching, persecution, and power. Leads directly to it. And signs of it. Why are the constituent elements of Acts chapter 1, the preaching of the gospel into all of the world as a witness to the nations, why isn't that the preaching of Matthew chapter 24? I mean, Acts chapter 1 is Jesus declaring to the apostles that they're supposed to do what Matthew chapter 24:14 told them would happen. It's the same identical thing. Okay? Is the persecution of being a witness to Christ different from them witnessing to Christ in Matthew 24, Mark chapter 13? Is the power that they were going to be given in Acts chapter 1, 7 and following, the power that they received through the baptism of the Holy Spirit in Acts chapter 2, did it not empower them to preach in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the world? Well, of course it did. Is that a different empowerment from Matthew and Mark? Of course it's not. So the question therefore becomes, if the preaching, persecution, and power in Matthew 24:14 or Matthew 24 and Acts chapter 1, if those are the same identical three constituent elements, then upon what basis, ladies and gentlemen, do we say, well, yeah, now the Parousia, yeah, in Matthew 24, yes, that's AD 70, but wait a minute now, that fourth constituent element in Acts chapter 1, that's something totally different. No, it's not. The preaching was to bear witness to the nations of the coming judgment. The persecution was to be vindicated, by the way, in AD 70, Matthew 23, 29 and following. And the power was to be the sign of the coming of the great and the terrible day of the Lord. That's what Peter said in Acts chapter 2, 15 and following. As he warned that audience, save yourselves from this untoward generation. The miracles were a sign of the coming great and terrible day of the Lord that they were supposed to flee from in that generation. Is that a different coming of the absent master of Acts chapter 1? Where's the proof? There is none. I think you can see the power of that fourfold pattern of Matthew chapter 24. The preaching, the persecution, the power, and the parousia. Widely admitted by amillennialists and postmillennialists to apply to AD 70. So once again, the question is, ladies and gentlemen, if we admit to the pattern in the Olivet Discourse, in that so-called first section, how do we divorce Acts chapter 1 from that same identical pattern, when it has to be admitted that Acts chapter 1 is giving the same constituent elements? I hope you catch the power of that. Okay, out of time. Thank you so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. I will see you on the flip side.